If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. Chicago awoke under a persistent rain that Tuesday. On Michigan Avenue, executives hurried between the thick drops that seemed to have offered no respite since dawn. The Lincoln Perk, a modern and trendy establishment, was crowded as always, the buzz of conversation mixed with the sound of coffee machines and the clinking of cups. Amid this bustling environment, Theo Sanders supervised everything with watchful eyes. At 38, Theo had never imagined he would be there, managing a cafe after a promising career as a software engineer. Life had other plans for him. His hair was already beginning to show premature white strands, silent witnesses to the hardships of the last 3 years. In a more secluded corner, his 7-year-old daughter Julia was drawing with concentration. Julia was born deaf. With her large brown eyes and curly hair, she was the living image of Mariana, her late mother. The girl communicated perfectly in ASL, American Sign Language, which Theo had learned with dedication after his daughter's diagnosis. For her, silence was her natural world, filled with colors, expressions, and movements that many couldn't see. "Dad, can I help serve the customers today?" Julia signed, her small fingers moving with the fluency of someone born to the language. "Not today, Princess. It's too busy," Theo signed back, smiling at his daughter. The cafe was at its peak when the door opened, letting in a gust of wind and a woman who immediately captured everyone's attention. Tall, with perfectly styled shoulder-length blonde hair and a vibrant red coat that contrasted with Chicago's gray sky. It was Helena Munro, though no one there knew her name at that moment. Her steps were firm, her posture impeccable, but her eyes revealed a vulnerability few would notice. Helena walked to the counter, where Raphael, one of the longest-serving baristas, was impatiently waiting for the next customer. Upon reaching the front, Helena began to move her hands in precise signs. Raphael frowned, confused. She tried again, this time more slowly. The barista looked around, embarrassed, and then let out a mocking laugh that cut through the room. "If you can't speak, maybe you shouldn't be ordering," he said aloud, provoking laughter from a few nearby customers. Helena's face stiffened, but her eyes betrayed the blow. It wasn't the first time she had faced this kind of situation, but each occurrence still hurt as if it were the first. She tried a third time, now pointing at the menu. Julia, observing the scene from her corner, closed her drawing book and, without asking her father's permission, walked decisively to the counter. With her small steps, she stood beside Helena and lightly touched her arm to get her attention. Helena looked down, surprised to see a little girl with bright eyes. Julia began to sign with her, her small hands moving with confidence. Helena's face instantly lit up with a genuine smile. "She wants an oat milk latte, unsweetened," Julia translated for Raphael, her childlike voice, slightly modulated like that of many deaf children who have learned to speak, sounding clear and firm in the now silent room. Raphael swallowed hard, his face red with shame. "1 oat milk latte, unsweetened," he repeated, avoiding looking directly at Helena. Theo, who had been watching from a distance, felt a mix of pride and concern. Julia always had this instinct to help, to connect with people who shared her condition. It was a beautiful quality, inherited from Mariana, but one that sometimes led her into situations he would rather avoid. "What's your name?" Helena signed to the girl, a warm smile on her face. "Julia Sanders," the girl signed back, and then spoke her name aloud, as she was used to doing so hearing people could understand her. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Julia. My name is Helena," the woman signed, crouching slightly to be at the girl's level. "You sign very well. Where did you learn?" "I was born deaf," Julia answered naturally. "My dad and I have talked in ASL since I was a baby." Helena nodded, visibly impressed. Her eyes scanned the cafe until they met Theo's, who was now approaching. There was a moment of silent recognition between the two adults, a non-verbal thank you from Helena, and a quiet acceptance from Theo. "I apologize for my employee," Theo said, his hands accompanying his words so Helena could understand. "He will be properly trained." Helena shook her head, dismissing the apology with an elegant gesture. "He's not the first, and he won't be the last," she signed back, resignation visible in her hands. Helena's order arrived and she paid, leaving a generous tip. Before leaving, she crouched down again beside Julia and took something from her purse. It was a business card, which she handed to the girl. "If you and your father ever want to visit a place where ASL is valued, come see me," she signed, smiling. Julia took the card carefully and handed it to her father. Theo read its contents and his blood ran cold. On the elegant white card, silver letters announced, "Helena Monroe, CEO, Innovatech Solutions." Theo's world seemed to stop. Innovatech was the company responsible for developing the autonomous system that had failed and caused the accident that took Mariana from him 3 years ago. The same company that covered up evidence, that ignored the safety reports written by Mariana herself, who was a systems safety engineer there. Theo felt his mouth go dry and his hands tremble. Julia, sensing the change in her father, tugged on his sleeve. "Are you okay, Dad?" she signed, concerned. Theo forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just surprised." Meanwhile, Helena had already stepped out into the rain, her red coat standing out in the grey crowd. Theo watched her through the cafe's fogged window, tumultuous thoughts racing through his mind. That woman represented everything he had lost, everything he had fought for in vain in the courts, where Innovatech's influence had prevailed over the truth. At the end of the day, when the Lincoln Perk finally closed its doors, Theo sat at one of the empty tables, Helena's card still in his hands. Julia had already fallen asleep in the small room at the back of the establishment, where they had lived since losing their house in the lawsuit against Innovatech. He couldn't stop thinking about that morning's encounter. It was as if the past had come knocking at his door, bringing with it all the pain and unanswered questions. What was Helena Monroe, CEO of the company that destroyed his life, doing in his small cafe? Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more? Theo put the card in the cash register drawer, determined to forget the incident. But fate, as always, had other plans. What he didn't know was that this chance meeting would change his life and his daughter's forever, unearthing long-silenced truths and connecting them to Helena Monroe in ways none of them could have imagined. 3 days had passed since the encounter with Helena Monroe. Theo tried to forget the incident, but the card tucked away in the cash register drawer seemed to call to him, a persistent reminder of a past he was striving to bury. The routine at the Lincoln Perk continued its normal course, with hurried customers coming and going, the aroma of freshly ground coffee filling the air, and Julia in her usual corner, now teaching basic signs to some regular customers who had been charmed by her. "Dad, is the lady in the red coat coming back?" Julia signed during a lull in the afternoon. "Rush." The question caught Theo off guard. "I don't know, honey, why?" "She had sad eyes," Julia replied, her fingers forming the signs with delicacy. "Like yours, sometimes." His daughter's observation hit Theo like a punch to the gut. He sometimes forgot how perceptive children could be, especially Julia, who compensated for her lack of hearing with a keen sensitivity to expressions and emotions. "Not everyone who looks sad needs help, Ju," he replied, trying to soften the moment. The rest of the afternoon passed normally until the cafe door opened again, bringing with it a gust of air and Helena Monroe. This time, without the red coat, she wore an elegant navy blue pantsuit that made her seem even more imposing. Julia's eyes lit up when she recognized her, and before Theo could intervene, the girl was already running toward her. Helena smiled upon seeing her, bending down to greet her in ASL. "You came back," Julia signed, excited. "A promise is a promise," Helena signed back, taking a small, colorfully wrapped package from her bag. "A gift for my favorite translator." Julia carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing an illustrated book about a deaf girl who adventured around the world. Her eyes sparkled with emotion. "Thank you," she signed enthusiastically, hugging the book to her chest. Theo watched the scene from a distance, conflicting feelings bubbling inside him. On one hand, Julia's genuine smile was something he had rarely seen since Mariana's death. On the other, Helena's presence evoked memories too painful to ignore. Taking a deep breath, he approached. "Ms. Monroe," he greeted formally, keeping a safe distance. "Please call me Helena," she signed, noticing the tension on Theo's face. "Can we talk for a moment?" Theo hesitated but nodded, indicating a table in the farthest corner of the cafe. He asked Paul, one of the employees, to take over the counter and sat across from Helena with Julia beside him, still absorbed in her new book. "This place is charming," Helena began, both signing and speaking slowly so Theo could read her lips if he preferred. "I'd never been in here before." "It's a good place," Theo replied curtly. "What brings you back, Ms. Monroe? Or should I say CEO of Innovatech?" The shift in tone was palpable, and Helena seemed to shrink slightly. Her deep blue eyes dropped for a moment before meeting Theo's again. "You know who I am," she stated, not as a question. "Hard to forget the name of the company that destroyed my life," Theo replied, his hands forming the signs with an intensity that betrayed his contained anger. Helena glanced at Julia for a moment, making sure the girl was distracted by her book, and then continued, now only with signs to keep the conversation private. "I came here to talk about a project, but now I understand there's something more important to discuss first," she signed, her movements precise and elegant. "Do you have any connection to Innovatech besides resentment?" Theo let out a bitter laugh. "My wife, Mariana Sanders, was a safety engineer at your company. She detected critical flaws in the autonomous driving system you were developing. She sent reports, alerts, tried everything to get someone to listen. No one paid attention." Helena's eyes widened in recognition. "Mariana Sanders," she signed slowly, as if trying to retrieve a distant memory. I wasn't directly involved in the autonomous project at the time, but I remember the name." "Of course you do," Theo retorted, bitterness evident in every movement of his hands. "Her name must have appeared on a lot of legal documents when Innovatech was scrambling to cover up its responsibility for the accident that killed her. The same system she warned would fail." Helena turned visibly pale. Her eyes filled with a genuine sadness that even Theo, in his anger, couldn't help but notice. "I'm so sorry," she signed after a long silence. "More than I can possibly express." "Sorry doesn't bring Mariana back," Theo replied. "It doesn't pay the bills that piled up during the lawsuit I lost. It doesn't explain to a 7-year-old girl why her mother isn't coming home." Julia, sensing the growing tension, looked up from her book. Her curious eyes darted between her father and Helena, trying to decipher the silent conversation happening before her. "What's wrong, Dad?" she signed, worried. Theo immediately softened his expression. "Nothing, Princess. We're just talking about work." Helena watched the interaction between father and daughter with a look that mixed admiration and something that seemed like guilt. She took a deep breath before continuing. "Theo, I came here by chance that day. I didn't know who you were or that Julia was your daughter, but now that I do, maybe this is more than a coincidence." She signed, her face taking on a determined expression. "I'm personally leading a new project at Innovatech, a real-time translation system for ASL using artificial intelligence. We need consultants who deeply understand the deaf community and its needs." Theo stared at her, incredulous. "And you want me to work for the company that killed my wife? That took everything from me? That forced me to accept a ridiculous settlement in exchange for my silence and still left me broke?" "I want you to help transform this company," Helena replied with intensity, "and maybe in the process we can find out exactly what happened to Mariana's reports." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with possibilities and fears. Julia, feeling the tension, touched her father's arm. "Dad, the lady is sad again," she signed with childlike concern. Theo looked at his daughter, so much like Mariana, not just physically, but in the compassion she showed at such a young age. Something stirred within him, a feeling he had suppressed for years. Hope. "Why should I trust you?" he asked Helena, his expression softer but still cautious. Helena hesitated and then did something unexpected. She reached up to her ears and discreetly removed 2 tiny, almost invisible hearing aids. The gesture was so subtle that Theo almost missed it. "Because I also live in silence," she replied, her voice now slightly different, with the characteristic modulation of someone who cannot perfectly hear their own speech. I lost 80% of my hearing when I was 12. I wear aids and lip read so well that most people never notice. I learned early on that showing vulnerability in the corporate world was a risk I couldn't afford to take. The revelation caught Theo completely off guard. His eyes studied Helena with a new perspective, seeing beyond the facade of the powerful executive. The difference, Helena continued, is that I had privileges that many in the deaf community will never have. That's why this project is so important to me, and that's why I need someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth even when it's painful. Julia, who had been watching intently, smiled when she realized Helena was also like her. Without ceremony, the girl reached out and touched the hearing aids Helena was holding. "Just like mine, but smaller," Julia signed, showing her own aids, which she used occasionally, though they didn't help much, in her case. That simple moment of connection between Helena and Julia disarmed Theo in a way no argument could have. He saw his daughter smile in a way she hadn't in a long time, and something inside him gave way. "I'm not promising anything," he finally said, both aloud and in sign, "but we can talk more about this project." Helena's face lit up with a genuine smile. "That's all I ask," she replied, discreetly putting her aids back in. "Tomorrow, at Innovatech headquarters, 10 a.m. I can send a car for you." Theo nodded reluctantly, aware that he was possibly opening a door he had tried to keep shut for years. But as he looked at Julia, he saw in his daughter's eyes a spark of enthusiasm that was priceless. What he didn't know was that by walking through the doors of Innovatech the next day, he would be taking the first step on a journey that would reveal long-buried secrets and forever change the course of their lives. The driver sent by Helena arrived promptly at 9:15 a.m. at the Lincoln Perk. Theo had left Paul in charge of the establishment, explaining only that he had to attend an important meeting. Julia was especially excited, wearing her favorite blue dress and carrying a small backpack with her new book. "Are we going to see where Helena works?" she signed as they got into the executive car with tinted windows. "Yes," Theo replied, trying to hide his anxiety. "But remember, it's just a visit, okay?" During the drive through Chicago's bustling avenues, Theo watched the urban landscape with a knot in his stomach. The last time he had been at Innovatech headquarters was 3 years ago, accompanied by a cheap lawyer who could barely stand up to the company's legal battalion. He had left defeated, with a settlement that barely covered Mariana's medical bills and funeral. The car stopped in front of an imposing glass and steel building in the Loop, the city's financial and technological heart. The Innovatech logo, a stylized eye in blue and green, dominated the facade. "We're here," the driver announced, opening the door for them. Julia looked up, amazed by the height of the building. Theo held her hand tightly, as if he feared she might disappear in this intimidating environment. At the reception, an elegant woman greeted them with a rehearsed smile. Theo noticed she seemed uncomfortable seeing Julia. "Mr. Sanders, Ms. Munro is waiting for you on the 30th floor. Here are your visitor badges." The elevator ascended quickly, making Theo's stomach sink even further. The memories of this place seemed to suffocate him. Julia, sensing her father's discomfort, squeezed his hand and smiled, as if to say everything would be all right. When the doors opened, Helena was there, waiting for them personally. Unlike most executives who would send assistants, she had made a point of welcoming them. She was wearing a light grey pantsuit, and her hair was tied back in an elegant bun. "Good morning," she greeted both verbally and in ASL. Her face lit up when she saw Julia. "So, did you like the book?" Julia nodded enthusiastically, opening her backpack to show she had brought it with her. Helena smiled, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Come on, I'll show you the lab where we're developing the project," she signed, guiding them down a wide hallway with glass walls that displayed different teams at work. Theo couldn't help but notice how the employees watched Helena with a mixture of respect and fear. Some seemed surprised to see her signing so fluently, as if this were a side of her they didn't know. The main lab was a large, bright space, with several workstations and high-definition screens on the walls. A team of about 10 people was working intently on different aspects of the project. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce Theo and Julia Sanders," Helena announced, alternating between speech and sign. Theo is a software engineer and an expert in ASL, and Julia is our junior consultant. The girl beamed at being introduced as a consultant, feeling important. The employees greeted the father and daughter with curious smiles, some trying to sign basic greetings they had clearly learned recently. A young woman with curly hair and colorful glasses approached, introducing herself as Denise, the project's technical lead. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said, looking directly at Julia while signing slowly. "We're developing an app that translates ASL to spoken English and vice versa in real time, using cameras and AI. We'd love your feedback." While Denise showed the prototypes to Julia, who seemed fascinated by the technology, Helena led Theo to a private meeting room adjacent to the lab. "What do you think?" she asked, once they were alone. "Impressive," Theo admitted reluctantly, "but I still don't understand why you want me here. There are far more qualified ASL consultants in Chicago." Helena studied him for a moment before answering. "I need someone who understands both technology and the deaf community, someone who isn't afraid to question decisions and point out flaws." She paused significantly. "Someone like Mariana." The mention of his wife's name hit Theo like a physical blow. "Don't use her name to manipulate me," he said, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "I'm not manipulating you," Helena replied firmly. "I'm being honest. Mariana was brilliant and brave. She identified flaws no one else saw, and no one listened to her." Helena sighed deeply. "I don't want to make the same mistake with this project." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unsaid emotions. "Here's the offer," Helena continued, pushing a folder toward Theo. "A 6-month contract as a lead consultant with an option to renew, a salary commensurate with your experience, premium health insurance that will cover any treatment Julia might need, and the flexibility to keep your cafe running. Also," she hesitated briefly, "access to all internal files related to the project Mariana worked on." Theo felt his heart race. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Helena answered simply, "and because I need you on this project. This technology could change the lives of millions of people with hearing loss in this country, including my own." Before Theo could respond, the door to the room opened abruptly. A tall man with graying hair and a severe expression entered unceremoniously. His impeccable suit and authoritarian posture betrayed his hierarchical position. "Helena, we need to talk about the investor meeting," he said, completely ignoring Theo's presence. Then, as if only now noticing the visitor, he turned with a forced smile. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Richard, this is Theo Sanders, our new consultant for Project Voice of Silence," Helena introduced, her posture subtly shifting to something more formal and defensive. Theo watched the dynamic between the two with interest. It was clear there was tension there. "Theo Sanders," Richard repeated, his smile freezing for an almost imperceptible moment. "The name sounds familiar." "Perhaps because my wife Mariana Sanders worked here a few years ago," Theo replied, holding the man's gaze. Richard's face hardened. "Ah, yes, a regrettable incident." He turned back to Helena, ignoring Theo again. "We need to discuss budgets now, Helena. The investors are concerned about the spending on your personal project." "It's not a personal project, Richard," Helena countered firmly. "It's a strategic investment in the company's future, and Mr. Sanders is crucial to its success." Richard let out a dry laugh. Of course. Well, when you're finished with your—" He glanced at Theo with disdain. "Charity interview, meet me in my office." After Richard left, a heavy silence filled the room. "Richard Alden," Helena explained, visibly uncomfortable. "Chief Operating Officer. He believes investing in accessibility is a waste of resources." "And as CEO, you can't just fire him?" Theo questioned. Helena gave a bitter smile. "Things are more complicated than they seem. Richard has powerful connections on the board. He was the one who—" She hesitated as if weighing her words, "who directly supervised the autonomous vehicle project at the time of the incident." Theo felt a chill run down his spine. The man who had just left was, possibly, the one most responsible for the negligence that cost Mariana her life. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Because you deserve to know who you're dealing with," Helena replied with sincerity, "and because I need someone who understands the risks involved." At that moment, Julia ran into the room, her eyes shining with excitement. Behind her, Denise was smiling, clearly charmed by the girl. "Dad, there's a robot that understands ASL," Julia signed, gesturing rapidly. "It said, 'hello' to me, and knew my name." Theo couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. He looked at Helena, who was watching the scene with a complex expression, a mixture of hope and determination. "When do I start?" he finally asked. Helena's smile was genuine and relieved. "Monday?" "Monday," he confirmed. As they left the building hours later, after a full tour of the facilities and formal introductions to the team, Julia held her father's hand tightly. "I liked it here," she signed as they waited for the elevator. "Helena looks sad sometimes, like you. But when she smiles, she looks like Mom in the pictures." The innocent observation struck Theo deeply. He looked at his daughter, so perceptive even at her young age, and wondered if he was making the right decision by returning to a place that held so many painful memories. On the way back home, as he watched the Chicago sunset paint the sky orange and pink, Theo couldn't help but feel he was crossing a point of no return. Something told him that accepting this job would change their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. And for the first time in 3 years, it wasn't just anger or resentment he felt when thinking about Innovatech. There was also a spark of hope. What he didn't know was that Richard Alden in his luxurious office on the 35th floor was frantically typing the name Theo Sanders into his computer, searching for information and making urgent calls. The man Helena had just hired represented a threat he could not tolerate, a threat to secrets buried 3 years ago, which needed to remain that way at all costs. Theo's first 2 weeks at Innovatech passed in a whirlwind of activity. Project Voice of Silence was advancing rapidly with his input. His mornings were dedicated to the cafe, which Paul now managed with more responsibility, while his afternoons and parts of his evenings were spent in the company's labs. Julia often accompanied him, becoming a beloved presence among the team, especially during the practical tests of the app. That Friday, Theo arrived earlier than usual. The building was still relatively empty, except for security guards and a few dedicated employees. He took advantage of the quiet to do something he had been planning since day one: investigate the files of the project Mariana had worked on. Helena had kept her promise to give him access, but between the demands of the new job and caring for Julia, he hadn't had time to delve deep into the information. Today, with Julia spending the morning at a friend's house from their building, was the perfect opportunity. Sitting at his workstation, Theo navigated the internal system to the folder marked Project Horizon, archived. Horizon was the name of the autonomous driving system that had tragically failed 3 years earlier. The failure had been officially attributed to human error on the part of the driver, despite Mariana's reports indicating problems with the software. Theo clicked on the folder and was met with a restricted access warning. Strange, he muttered to himself. Helena had assured him he would have full access. He tried again, entering his password, but the system continued to deny permission. "Trouble so soon?" The voice made Theo jump. Helena was standing behind him, holding 2 cups of coffee. Despite the early hour, she was already impeccably dressed in a pearl grey pantsuit. Theo noticed she always looked particularly elegant when she had meetings with the board or investors. "I was trying to access the Project Horizon files," he explained, "but it seems I don't have permission." Helena frowned, placing the cups on the desk. "That's odd. I set up your access myself." She leaned over him, typing quickly. "Try now." Theo tried again. Ithupan, same warning appeared. "Someone modified the permissions," Helena concluded, visibly annoyed. "Probably Richard." "Why would he do that?" Helena hesitated, as if measuring her words. "Richard never wanted me to hire you. He thinks your connection to the case could bring trouble for the company." Theo felt anger rising within him. What kind of trouble? That the truth might come out? "Precisely," Helena replied, sitting down beside him. She looked around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. Richard was the director in charge of Project Horizon. He was the one who made the final decision to launch the system, even with the safety warnings. Mariana's warnings, Theo completed, his voice low and tense. Helena nodded. Among others, but hers were the most detailed and damning. A heavy silence fell over them. Helena seemed to be debating internally whether to say more. There's something you're not telling me, Theo pressed, watching her closely. Helena sighed, discreetly removing her hearing aids, a gesture Theo had come to recognize as a sign she was about to share something personal. My father was the CEO at the time, she finally revealed. Charles Monroe. Richard was his right-hand man, almost like a son to him. When the first reports about system failures came in, Richard downplayed them. He convinced my father they were minor issues, easily fixable with future updates. And your father believed him? My father was sick. Terminal cancer. He was gradually transferring his responsibilities to me, but Richard still had enormous influence over him. And over me, too, I admit. Helena nervously fiddled with her delicate earrings. I was young, insecure, trying to prove my worth in a world dominated by men who didn't take me seriously. Richard took advantage of that. Theo absorbed the information slowly. Did you know about Mariana's reports before the accident? Helena closed her eyes for a moment. Not specifically, I knew there were concerns, but Richard always filtered them before they reached me, presenting them as exaggerations from perfectionist engineers. Only after the accident, she paused, her voice faltering slightly. Only after did I discover the extent of the negligence. And you did nothing about it? Theo questioned, unable to hide the accusation in his voice. I was lost, Theo, Helena confessed, her eyes now fixed on his. My father passed away a week after the accident. Suddenly, I was the CEO of a company in crisis with a hostile board, and Richard manipulating everything behind the scenes. He convinced me that taking responsibility would be the end of Innovatech, that thousands would lose their jobs. He said the best thing was a confidential settlement and to move on. And you agreed? Yes, she admitted, shame evident on her face. It's my biggest regret. Only years later, when I finally consolidated my position and could review old documents, did I realize the magnitude of what had been covered up. Theo felt a confusing mix of emotions, anger, understanding, even a pang of compassion that surprised him. That's why you brought me here, he concluded. It's not just about the current project. Project Voice of Silence is genuine, Helena assured him quickly. But yes, I also want to right the wrongs of the past. I want the truth to come out, Theo. Richard needs to be held accountable, and the affected families deserve justice, including yours. Before Theo could reply, his computer beeped. A notification appeared on the screen. Temporary access permission granted for Project Horizon, archived. Helena smiled faintly. I gave you emergency access from my own login. You'll have about 2 hours before the system detects the anomaly. Use that time wisely. She put her hearing aids back in and stood up. I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. Richard will be there, so we're safe for now. Theo nodded, grateful for her trust. Helena, he called out as she was walking away. Why are you risking so much now? Your position, your reputation. Helena stopped, turning to face him. Because silence has a price I'm no longer willing to pay. I believe you understand that better than anyone. After Helena left, Theo dove into the Project Horizon files. There were thousands of documents, including technical reports, emails, test logs, and legal papers. He knew exactly what to look for. Mariana's reports. He found them quickly, a series of meticulously detailed documents about potential failures in the obstacle recognition system under adverse conditions. Mariana had identified a faulty algorithm that could cause the vehicle to ignore specific objects under certain lighting conditions. Her reports were clear, precise, and alarming. Alongside the reports, Theo found emails exchanged between Mariana and her superiors. Initially, they were met with interest, then growing irritation, and finally, explicit hostility. The last email she sent, 3 days before the accident, had a desperate tone. I am formally registering my objection to the launch of the Horizon system in its current version. The tests show critical failures that have not been addressed. We are putting lives at risk. If necessary, I will take these concerns directly to the board and regulatory authorities. The email was marked as read by 2 recipients, Mariana's direct supervisor and Richard Alden. Richard's response made Theo's blood run cold. Your concerns have been duly noted and considered. The launch will proceed as scheduled. I remind you that your contract includes confidentiality clauses. Any external communication regarding proprietary matters will result in immediate legal action. I suggest you focus on correcting the alleged problems for future updates rather than creating unnecessary alarmism. Theo was so engrossed in reading that he barely noticed when Denise entered the lab, looking agitated. Theo, I was looking for you. Richard is coming this way and he looks furious. The board meeting ended early and he said he needs to speak with you urgently. Theo quickly began saving the documents to a flash drive. How much time do we have? Minutes, maybe less, Denise replied nervously. What's going on? I've never seen him like this. Long story, Theo answered, typing frantically as the documents copied. Where's Helena? Still tied up with some board members. Theo, be careful. Richard has a lot of power here. Denise had barely finished speaking when Richard stormed into the lab. His usually composed face was red with fury. Sanders, he boomed, striding toward Theo's workstation. What do you think you're doing? Theo remained calm, discreetly unplugging the flash drive and slipping it into his pocket. Working on the project I was hired for, Mr. Alden. Don't play dumb, Richard hissed, leaning over him. I know exactly what you're looking for. And let me save you some time, there's nothing to find. All files related to Project Horizon were reviewed and corrected years ago. Corrected or altered? Theo challenged, standing up to face Richard. The 2 men stood face to face, the tension palpable in the air. The other employees in the lab watched, frozen. Watch your insinuations, Sanders, Richard warned, his voice dangerously low. You're here on some philanthropic whim of Helena's, but I can assure you your stay will be short. We will not destroy this company's reputation because of some failed engineer and his disabled daughter. The mention of Julia was enough. Theo lunged forward, but Denise quickly stepped between them. Mr. Alden, I'm afraid you're interfering with our testing schedule, she intervened, with a courage that surprised everyone. We have an important demonstration tomorrow. Richard stepped back, composing himself. Of course, my apologies for the interruption, Denise. Mr. Sanders, he turned to Theo with a cold smile. We'll continue this conversation another time. After Richard left, Denise let out the breath she had been holding. What was that? He knows I found something, Theo muttered, still tense. Denise, I need your help. There's something you need to see. At lunchtime in a small coffee shop far from Innovatech, Theo showed Denise the documents he had saved. The young engineer examined each one in silence, her face gradually growing pale. This is so much worse than I imagined, she said finally. Richard knew, he knew, and let the launch proceed. And then he covered it all up, Theo added. The question is, what do we do now? We need to show this to Helena, Denise stated with determination. She's the only one with the power to stand up to Richard. Theo nodded, but a doubt nagged at him. Do you trust her completely? Denise hesitated for only a moment. Yes, she's not perfect, but she has a good heart. And since she truly took over as CEO, she's been transforming the company. Project Voice of Silence is proof of that. Then let's find her, Theo decided, standing up, before Richard has a chance to prepare. What Theo didn't know was that Richard was already several steps ahead. At that very moment, in his luxurious office, he was conducting an emergency meeting with lawyers and loyal executives, plotting a bold move for the next morning, one that could completely change the course of events and threaten not only Helena's position in the company, but also the possibility of justice that Theo so desperately sought. Finding Helena that afternoon was harder than Theo and Denise had imagined. After the tumultuous board meeting, she had been dragged into a series of external commitments. It was only at 7 in the evening, when the Innovatech building was almost empty, that they finally managed to catch her in her office on the top floor. Helena looked exhausted, her usual impeccable bun now slightly undone, small strands of hair framing her face. She slipped off her high heels as soon as she closed the door, a small gesture that revealed her fatigue. "Sorry for the delay. The board is panicking about the new investments and—" Helena stopped when she noticed the serious expressions on Theo and Denise's faces. "What happened?" "We found something," Theo said, placing the flash drive on Helena's desk. "Something Richard didn't want us to see." Over the next 40 minutes, they showed Helena all the documents they had discovered. Mariana's reports, the email exchanges, Richard's direct orders to ignore safety warnings, and later documents showing how he had coordinated the legal strategy to attribute the blame to the driver's human error. "He knew," Helena murmured, her face pale as she read the last document. "He knew the risks, and still went ahead." "And then he organized the cover-up," Denise added. "Helena, these documents clearly show that Richard committed criminal negligence. People died because of these decisions." Helena closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she reopened them, there was a steely determination in her gaze. "We need to proceed with caution," she said. "Richard has powerful allies both inside and outside the company. If we're going to expose this, we need to be meticulous." "What do you suggest?" Theo asked. "First, we need to safeguard this evidence. Richard must have realized you accessed the files. He'll try to delete or alter them." Helena picked up the flash drive. "I'll make copies and store them in secure locations." "And then," Theo pressed, his impatience evident. 3 years of waiting for justice made every additional minute a torture. "I'll discreetly consult a few trusted board members," Helena replied. "We need internal support before we go public. We also need specialized legal counsel, someone not connected to the firms that usually represent Innovatech." Theo nodded, acknowledging the wisdom of the approach, even if part of him wanted to just expose everything immediately. "How long?" he asked. "A few days, a week at most," Helena assured him. "I promise, I won't let this be forgotten again, Theo." When they left Helena's office, it was past 9 at night. The building was silent, with only the cleaning crew and a few security guards moving through the empty corridors. "Need a ride?" Denise offered as they rode the elevator down. "My car's in the parking garage." Theo declined with a tired smile. "Thanks, but I need to pick up Julia from her friend's house. It's on the way to the subway station." They said their goodbyes at the building's entrance. The night was surprisingly pleasant for Chicago, the exceptionally clear sky allowing a glimpse of a few stars despite the city's light pollution. Theo walked quickly to the apartment where Julia was staying, a few blocks away. She had spent the day with Annie, a classmate from the special school she attended 3 times a week. The two had become inseparable since they met, both sharing the experience of deafness and fluency in ASL. As he walked, Theo couldn't stop thinking about the documents they had discovered. There was a part of him that still didn't fully believe justice would be served. So many doors had been closed to him in the last 3 years that it was hard to trust that now finally the truth would come out. When he arrived at Annie's building, he found Julia in the lobby, chatting animatedly in ASL with her friend's mother, Patricia. Upon seeing him, his daughter's face lit up with a radiant smile. "Dad," she signed, running to hug him. "We made a video today. Can I show you?" "Of course, Princess," he replied, smiling at Patricia in thanks. "Let's go home and you can tell me all about it." On the way to the small apartment they rented since losing their house, Julia didn't stop signing about her day. Apparently she and Annie had spent hours making an ASL video for a school project on inclusion. "We used Aunt Patricia's phone to record," Julia explained, her fingers moving with enthusiasm. "Then we made cookies." Theo smiled, nodding and answering his daughter's questions, but part of his mind was still in Helena's office, thinking about the next steps. When they finally reached the apartment and Julia ran to the bathroom to get ready for bed, Theo allowed himself a moment of quiet. Sitting in the small living room that also served as a kitchen and workspace, he took out a faded photo of Mariana. She was smiling broadly, her curly hair blowing in the wind, on a picnic day in Lincoln Park, just a few months before the accident. Julia, then 4 years old, was on her lap, both of them making the sign for love with their hands. "We're getting there, Mari," he murmured, tracing his finger over the image. "The truth is going to come out." When Julia came out of the bathroom, already in her pajamas with her teeth brushed, She found her father still contemplating the photograph. Silently, she sat beside him and rested her head on his shoulder. "I miss Mom," she signed, her large brown eyes fixed on the photo. "Me too, Princess," Theo signed back. "Every single day." Julia took the photo, observing it intently. "Mom wouldn't want you to be sad forever," she signed with the surprising wisdom she sometimes showed. "She liked it when you smiled." Theo felt a lump in his throat. "How do you know?" "In the pictures," Julia explained, pointing to other framed photos on the wall. "She's always looking at you when you smile, like Helena looks at you sometimes." The innocent observation caught Theo by surprise. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a message. It was Helena. "Important meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Bringing trusted lawyer. Fast progress. Important. Don't mention this to anyone yet." Theo replied, confirming his attendance, and put his phone away. The message brought hope but also anxiety. Things were moving. Quickly. Perhaps too quickly. "Time for bed, Princess," he signed, standing up and holding out his hand to Julia. After putting his daughter to bed and reading her a story in ASL, a routine they kept religiously, Theo returned to the living room. He was too restless to sleep. He decided to review the documents he had discovered again. He connected his laptop and accessed the copy of the files he had made for himself. As he meticulously reviewed each report, each email, a detail caught his attention. A reference in one of Mariana's last emails to a full backup she had created. Theo frowned, trying to remember if Mariana had mentioned any backup before the accident. Nothing came to mind. But knowing his wife's meticulous nature, it made sense that she would have safeguarded important evidence. Impulsively, he stood up and went to the small closet where they kept the few things left of Mariana's after they had to sell almost everything to cover medical and legal expenses. It was a simple cardboard box containing some of her favorite books, modest jewelry, and a folder with personal documents. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a scarf that still held a faint trace of Mariana's perfume, was an old flash drive that Theo had never checked, assuming it contained only personal photos. With his heart racing, he plugged it into his laptop. The flash drive contained several folders, most of them indeed with family photos and personal documents. But there was one folder simply named Horizon, protected by a password. Theo tried Mariana's usual passwords, without success. Frustrated, he was about to give up when he had an idea. He typed Julia Star 2017, a reference to his daughter and the year Julia had won her first prize at an ASL poetry festival, where the judges had called her their little star. The folder opened, revealing dozens of documents, saved emails, and, to Theo's surprise, several videos. With trembling hands, he clicked on the first video file. Mariana's face filled the screen, her eyes determined but visibly worried. "My name is Mariana Sanders, a safety engineer at Innovatech," she began. "I am recording this video on March 15, 2020, 3 days before the official launch of the Horizon system. What I am about to show you is evidence of critical safety flaws that have been ignored by the company's management." The video continued with Mariana presenting the technical problems in detail, showing screenshots of failed tests, emails exchanged with management, and even recordings of meetings where her concerns were explicitly dismissed. At the end of the video, she looked directly at the camera, her voice firm despite her evident emotion. "I am making this recording as a last resort. I have tried all official channels within the company. I was ignored, then silenced, and now I am being threatened. If anything happens to me, I want it to be clear. Innovatech is knowingly releasing a system with flaws that could cost lives. And Richard Alden, as Chief Operating Officer, is the person most responsible for this decision." Theo felt hot tears streaming down his face as he watched his wife, so alive on the screen, fighting for the truth. The other videos showed practical tests of the system, clearly demonstrating the failures she had identified. The last file was different, a short video recorded on a phone, apparently hidden. It showed a meeting between Richard and other executives, where he explicitly said, "The costs of delaying the launch would be catastrophic for the quarterly results. The issues raised by the safety team are extremely unlikely to occur in real-world conditions. We will proceed as planned and deal with any adjustments in future updates. As for Mariana Sanders, I suggest we find a way to reassign her. She's becoming a problem." Theo was stunned. There it was, on video, the unequivocal proof of Richard's criminal negligence. Mariana had documented everything, predicting they would try to cover up the truth. With trembling hands, he removed the flash drive and stored it carefully. This was evidence too precious to risk. Tomorrow, at the meeting with Helena and the lawyer, he would present his discovery. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, an emergency meeting was taking place in Richard Alden's luxurious apartment. The COO, along with lawyers and allies on the board, was preparing a bold move for the following morning, one that could completely change the course of events and threaten not only Helena's position in the company, but also the possibility of justice for which Theo had longed for so long. As the city slept under a star-dusted sky, unseen forces were moving, setting the stage for a confrontation that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. The truth, kept hidden for so long, was about to come to light, and not even Richard Alden, with all his power and influence, could stop it forever. Theo barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mariana's face in the recording, her determination, her courage. At 6 in the morning, he gave up trying to rest and made a strong pot of coffee. Julia was still sleeping soundly, clutching the book Helena had given her. He sent a message to Paul, explaining he would be late to the cafe that day. Then he gently woke Julia, explaining that she would spend the morning at school and then go to Annie's house again. "Are you having that important meeting today?" Julia signed as she chewed on a piece of toast at breakfast. "Yes," Theo replied. "How do you know it's important?" Julia smiled, her perceptive eyes shining. "You're wearing the tie Mom gave you. You only wear it on special days." Theo touched the navy blue tie, surprised. He hadn't consciously realized his choice, but Julia was right. It was the last tie Mariana had given him, carefully saved for significant occasions. "It is a special day," he confirmed, signing slowly. "Today we're going to honor Mom's memory." After dropping Julia off at school, Theo went straight to Innovatech. He arrived at 7:30, half an hour before the scheduled meeting with Helena. The building was already bustling, employees arriving for another day of work, unaware of the drama about to unfold on the upper floors. In the elevator, Theo checked the flash drive in his jacket's inner pocket again. He didn't trust leaving it anywhere else. That small object contained not just evidence, but Mariana's voice, preserved as a testimony that would finally be heard. When the elevator doors opened on the 30th floor, Theo immediately sensed something was wrong. The executive floor, usually quiet at that hour, was buzzing with activity. Groups of people were talking in low voices, casting glances his way as he passed. Denise intercepted him before he could reach Helena's office. "Theo," she called out, her face pale with worry. "Haven't you heard?" "Heard what?" "Richard called an emergency board meeting at 6 a.m., Denise explained, pulling him into a more discreet corner. "Helena's been in there ever since. They're saying he presented a motion to remove her as CEO." Theo's blood ran cold. "On what grounds?" "Allegations of financial mismanagement and conflicts of interest," Denise replied, "but everyone knows it's retaliation. Somehow he found out we're investigating the Horizon case." At that moment, the doors to the boardroom opened. Helena emerged first, her face a mask of professional composure, but Theo could see the storm in her eyes. Behind her, Richard appeared with a satisfied smirk, surrounded by executives and board members. Helena spotted Theo and Denise and walked directly toward them. "My office now," she said simply, without stopping. They followed her in silence. As soon as the door closed, Helena's facade crumbled. She leaned against her desk, breathing deeply. "That son of a bitch did it," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "The board voted for my temporary removal while they investigate the accusations." "What accusations exactly?" Theo asked. "Officially. Mismanagement of funds, favoritism in hiring, conflict of interest." Helena let out a bitter laugh. "In reality, Richard showed the board that we accessed the Project Horizon files and are conspiring to harm the company with unfounded allegations about liability in the accident. He can't do that, Denise protested. The documents we found were audited and scrubbed years ago, according to him. Helena interrupted. Richard convinced the board that we're fabricating evidence for a larger compensation lawsuit. And they believed him? Theo asked, incredulous. Most of them did. Richard has old allies on the board, people who worked with my father, and still see him as the natural successor. Helena ran a hand through her hair, further disheveling her bun. I have 24 hours to clear out my office. Richard takes over as interim CEO immediately. A heavy silence fell over the room. Their plan had collapsed before it had even begun. What about the lawyer? Theo finally asked. Dr. Camilla Lane, Helena replied, gesturing to a middle-aged woman who was quietly entering the office at that moment. An old friend from college, thankfully not connected to the firms that usually represent Innovatech. Camilla greeted them all with a discreet nod. There was an aura of serene competence about her, with her short grey hair and penetrating gaze behind elegant glasses. A complicated situation, she commented succinctly, but not impossible. Camilla, they've removed me, Helena explained, frustration evident in her voice. I heard. I was just outside the boardroom. Camilla placed her briefcase on the desk. Which means we now have nothing to lose. I've reviewed the evidence you sent me last night, Helena. It's substantive, but still circumstantial. Richard could argue it was misinterpreted or even manipulated. Theo stepped forward. I have something that could change that. All eyes turned to him as he took the flash drive from his pocket and recounted his discovery from the previous night. As he explained about Mariana's videos, Helena's expression shifted from surprise to shock, and finally to fierce determination. We need to see this now, she said. Theo connected the flash drive to Helena's computer, and the four of them watched Mariana's videos, in silence. Seeing his wife's face again, hearing her voice as she methodically explained the system's flaws and the company's negligence, was emotionally devastating for Theo, but he maintained his composure, focusing on the others' reactions. Helena was crying silently. Denise covered her mouth with her hands, horrified. Camilla was taking notes furiously, occasionally making small exclamations of surprise. The video of the secret meeting, where Richard explicitly dismissed safety concerns in favor of financial results, was the final blow. When the recording ended, the ensuing silence was thick with outrage and renewed determination. This changes everything, Camilla declared, closing her notepad. This is no longer a he said, she said situation. We have direct proof of conscious and deliberate negligence, followed by a cover-up. What do we do now? Denise asked. We need to act quickly before Richard has a chance to control the narrative any further, Helena replied, wiping her tears and reassuming her leadership posture. Camilla, what are our options? Legally? We can present this to the authorities immediately. There are clear crimes here: negligence, document forgery, obstruction of justice. Camilla adjusted her glasses. But Richard has powerful political connections. The process could take years. We don't have years, Theo stated. He's already moving pieces to neutralize us. Then we need to be smarter, Helena concluded, an idea forming in her mind. We're going to expose everything publicly, today. How? Denise questioned. The presentation for Project Voice of Silence to investors and the press, Helena answered, a determined glint in her eyes. It's scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main auditorium. Richard didn't cancel it because he wants to show continuity to the investors. But you've been removed, Theo reminded her. He won't let you on stage. Not as CEO, Helena agreed, but I'm still the creator of the project, and you, Theo, are the lead consultant. She moved closer to him. It's risky. Richard will be there, probably with enhanced security. We could be prevented from speaking or worse. It's worth the risk, Theo decided without hesitation. For Mariana. For all the silenced voices, Helena added, placing a hand on his. Over the next few hours, they carefully prepared their plan. Camilla made copies of the videos and documents, storing them in multiple secure locations. Denise, using her technical expertise, ensured they would have control over the auditorium's audio-visual systems. Helena discreetly contacted journalists she trusted, ensuring they would be present. At 1:45 p.m., minutes before the presentation, Theo received a message that almost made him give up on everything. Julia's school had tried to contact him several times. His daughter was anxious, asking for him, sensing that something important was happening. "Go," Helena said, seeing his troubled face. "Your daughter needs you." Theo hesitated, torn between his duty to Julia and his commitment to Mariana's truth. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Julia's teacher. "Mr. Sanders, your daughter is very agitated. She insists she needs to be with you today. She says it's important to honor her mother's memory." Theo felt a lump in his throat. Somehow Julia had understood the magnitude of this day. "Can you bring her to the Innovatech building? I'll be waiting in the reception." 15 minutes later, Julia ran into her father's arms in the lobby of the imposing building. Her teacher, Sandra, a dedicated ASL interpreter, watched the scene with an emotional smile. "She wouldn't stop saying she needed to be with you today," Sandra explained. "She has an incredible intuition." "Thank you for bringing her," Theo said, hugging his daughter tightly. "I knew it was today." Julia signed when they separated. "The day to honor Mom." "How did you know, Princess?" Theo asked, astonished. "I dreamed about her last night," Julia replied with childlike simplicity. She was smiling and making this sign. Julia moved her hands to form the sign for truth, followed by the sign for light. "The truth comes to light," Theo translated, feeling chills run down his spine. When they went up to the auditorium floor, Helena was waiting for them in the hallway, visibly nervous. "Richard brought extra security," she informed them, "and he's instructing the tech crew not to let me speak." Seeing Julia, Helena smiled genuinely, crouching to be at the girl's level. "Hello, little consultant. Did you come to help us today?" Julia nodded solemnly. "I came to help Mom," she signed. Helena looked at Theo, questioning. "Long story," he replied, "but I think she's exactly where she needs to be." Inside the auditorium, hundreds of people were already seated: investors, journalists, company employees. On stage, Richard was adjusting his microphone, clearly ready to take control of the presentation. "He's going to start by announcing his role as interim CEO," Helena predicted. "Then he'll present the project as if it were his idea, minimizing my contribution and yours." "Not if we have anything to say about it," Theo replied, determined. They entered discreetly and positioned themselves near the stage. Denise, already at the soundboard, gave them a subtle nod, indicating that everything was ready. Richard began exactly as Helena had foreseen, announcing his new role with false humility and lamenting the unfortunate circumstances that had led to Helena's removal. As he started presenting Project Voice of Silence, Helena squeezed Theo's arm, signaling it was time. Without hesitation, Theo walked up the side steps of the stage, followed by Helena. Julia instinctively went with them. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard hissed as they approached the microphones. "Security." "Just a moment, Richard," Helena said calmly, her voice amplified by the microphone Denise had remotely activated. "Before we talk about the future of Innovatech, we need to settle accounts with the past." The auditorium fell silent, all eyes fixed on the stage. Richard made a move to intercept Helena, but stopped when he noticed the dozens of cameras pointed at them. "As many of you know, I was removed from the position of CEO today," Helena continued, her voice clear and firm. "What you don't know is why. It wasn't for mismanagement, but because we discovered the truth about one of the darkest chapters in this company's history." Richard tried to reach the microphone, but Theo stood in his way. "I think you'd better hear what she has to say," he advised in a low voice, "unless you want your attempt to silence her again to be filmed by all these journalists." Helena proceeded, recounting with surgical precision the events related to Project Horizon, the accident and the subsequent cover-up. As she spoke, Denise projected excerpts from the documents they had discovered onto the giant screen. "But you don't have to take my word for it," Helena declared, removing her hearing aids in a symbolic gesture that captured everyone's attention. The engineer who tried to prevent this tragedy left her own testimony. The auditorium lights dimmed, and Mariana's video began to play on the screen, her clear and determined voice echoing through the silent space. My name is Mariana Sanders, a safety engineer at Innovatech. I am recording this video on March 15, 2020, 3 days before the official launch of the Horizon system. Theo watched Richard's face as the video progressed. The man grew paler and paler, especially when his own image appeared on the screen, clearly admitting he was ignoring safety warnings in favor of financial results. When the video ended, a stunned silence filled the auditorium. It was Julia who broke it, walking to the center of the stage and signing with her small hands. "That is my mom. She tried to save people. No one listened to her." Denise, prepared for the moment, projected a simultaneous translation of Julia's words onto the screen, moving everyone present. Theo approached the microphone, his voice thick with emotion, but firm. In his resolve, my wife, Mariana Sanders, identified flaws that could have been corrected. She repeatedly warned her superiors. She was ignored, then silenced. When the system failed exactly as she predicted, the company covered up the truth, protected the guilty, and destroyed her reputation. Helena took back the microphone. As CEO of Innovatech, I accept my share of responsibility for not properly investigating this case when I took office. It was my failure, my cowardice, and I will live with that regret. But today we are correcting that mistake. She signaled to Denise, who projected the contact information for Dr. Camilla Lane, who was already standing in the front row. Starting today, Innovatech commits to full transparency. All documents related to Project Horizon will be made available to the authorities. The company will cooperate fully with the investigations and will assume its legal and moral responsibility to the affected families. Richard, finally finding his voice, lunged for the microphone. "This is an outrage. These allegations are false. This evidence has been manipulated. The board has already determined—" He was interrupted by a board member who stood up in the audience. "As chairman of the board, I ask you to step away from the microphone, Mr. Alden. In light of this evidence, I consider Ms. Monroe's removal suspended, pending a full investigation." Federal agents, contacted earlier by Camilla, entered the auditorium discreetly, positioning themselves near the exits. At this moment, something unexpected happened. Helena approached Julia, kneeling to be at the girl's level. With fluid movements, she began to sign in ASL. The project we are presenting today is called Voice of Silence because we believe every voice deserves to be heard, even those that do not use spoken words. Today, we give voice to a truth that was silenced for far too long. Denise activated the prototype they had been working on for the past few weeks, a real-time translation system that converted ASL into voice through artificial intelligence. As Helena continued to sign, the system perfectly translated her words. This project was born from my own experience as a person with hearing loss, from the courage of people like Mariana Sanders, and from the hope represented by children like Julia. It is not just a product. It is a commitment to truth, to inclusion, and to righting the wrongs of the past. The demonstration of the system, working perfectly at such an emotionally charged moment, brought a wave of applause from the auditorium. Journalists typed furiously on their laptops, capturing every moment. Richard, realizing he had lost control of the situation, tried to leave discreetly, but was intercepted by the federal agents, who escorted him out of the auditorium for questioning. In the hours that followed, the Innovatech scandal dominated the news. The company entered a crisis, but of a different kind, a crisis of transformation. The board, pressured by public opinion and shareholders, reinstated Helena as CEO with a mandate to implement radical changes in corporate governance. 6 months later, on a sunny spring morning, Theo and Julia were crossing a busy street toward the Lincoln Perk, now completely renovated and renamed the Horizon Café. With the legal settlement finally concluded, Theo had used part of the compensation to buy the establishment and transform it into a fully accessible space, especially for the deaf community. The cafe now had staff fluent in ASL, menus with printed ASL translations, and a visual alert system instead of traditional audible bells. It had become a popular meeting spot for both deaf people and hearing people interested in learning the language. "Dad, look who's here," Julia signed excitedly, pointing to the door. Helena was entering the cafe without her usual formal executive posture. She was wearing jeans and a simple blouse, and her blonde hair was down, falling softly over her shoulders. Without makeup and without her hearing aids, she looked younger and much more relaxed. "Good morning," she signed, approaching the table where Theo was preparing a special Sunday breakfast. In recent weeks, this had become a pleasant routine. Helena would come for breakfast on Sundays, bringing stories about the transformations at the company and about the Mariana Sanders Foundation, created to promote corporate ethics and the inclusion of people with disabilities. "I have some news," Helena announced, sitting down next to Julia, who immediately showed her a drawing she was making. "What is it?" Theo asked, placing a cup of coffee with milk in front of Helena. Just the way she liked it, unsweetened. "The cochlear implant surgery for Julia has been approved," Helena replied, her eyes shining with emotion. "The doctors at the foundation believe she has an excellent chance of success." Julia, who already knew about the possibility but not the confirmation, looked at her father expectantly. Although she was perfectly happy, in her silent world, the idea of being able to hear her father's voice had always intrigued her. "It's true, Princess," Theo confirmed, signing tenderly. "If you want to, you'll soon be able to hear sounds." Julia's little face lit up with a radiant smile. She turned to Helena and signed something that made the woman blush intensely. "What did she say?" Theo asked, curious. Helena hesitated for a moment before answering. "She said that when she can hear, she wants to hear my voice and yours together every day." A meaningful silence hung between them, full of unexpressed possibilities. Over the past few months, their relationship had evolved from colleagues to friends, and now to something deeper that neither of them had yet put into words. Julia, with the sincerity of children, had expressed what they had both been feeling, a desire to build something together, a future where the painful past was not forgotten, but transformed into strength and purpose. "Julia is always one step ahead of us," Theo commented finally, his hands forming the signs with tenderness. "She has her mother's wisdom," Helena replied, reaching out to lightly touch his hand on the table. In that simple moment, in an ordinary cafe on a Sunday morning, something extraordinary was happening. The healing of old wounds, the birth of new possibilities, the living proof that even the most painful stories could find redemption. Outside, the city of Chicago pulsed with its relentless energy. Inside the Horizon Cafe, however, time seemed to slow down, creating a safe space where silence, far from being an absence, was a language rich with meaning, where silenced voices finally found expression, and where the future, with all its promises and challenges, waited to be written with brave hands and open hearts. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Theo, Julia, and Helena has touched your hearts. The courage to give voice to silence, to fight for the truth, and to transform pain into purpose is something that resonates with all of us. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other unforgettable stories. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this narrative touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life in all its colors and contradictions. We look forward to seeing you in the comments to share which moments moved you the most in this story of overcoming and new beginnings.